Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Treanor. I'm the Dean of Georgetown Law, and it's my privilege to welcome you to this event, which involves leading alumni and faculty in conversation about voting rights. We're marking today and this week the launch of our 150th anniversary. Georgetown Law opened its doors on October 5th, 1870, and we are this week marking our 150th. And that's a time to reflect on our legacy of excellence and access and look forward to the next 150 years with an eye towards public service and the pursuit of justice. So at this point on Wednesday, we're now halfway through our 150th anniversary week, and I hope you're enjoying our programming, and we're using it to share the impact that our leaders have in making the world. Today's program exemplifies our leadership in social justice and specifically the cause of voting rights. Because of the renowned group we've assembled, it is a true highlight of the anniversary week, and it could not be a more timely discussion. Today we'll have a panel discussion moderated by Professor Aderson François. After the central discussion, we'll have time for questions and answers. The panelists will be answering questions you pre-submitted, and they will also take some that you type into the chat box. So in the event will conclude at 12:30 Eastern time. So I will be turning matters over to Professor François, and in addition to moderating, he's going to be introducing our alumni rights, Morial and Andrea, and I'm just so delighted that they're joining us for this conversation. So let me begin by talking about the faculty who'll be participating. You'll be hearing from Professor Paul Smith. Professor Smith is a professor from practice at Georgetown Law. He's Vice President for Litigation and Strategy at the Campaign Legal Center. Until 2017, he was in practice at the firm of General Block. He had an active appellate practice for decades, including oral arguments in 21 Supreme Court cases in a wide range of cases, including many involving voting rights. He attended Yale Law School, where he was editor-in-chief of the Law Journal, and then he clerked for Judge James Oakes on the Second Circuit and the Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell. We'll also hear Rick Professor at Georgetown Law, and we're delighted that he's with us this year on Zoom. He's also the Chancellor's Professor of Law and Political Science at UC Irvine and an election law analyst for CNN. Rick is a nationally recognized expert in election law and campaign finance regulation. He read well in the legislation, statutory interpretation, remedies, and torts. And he's the co-author of leading case books. So writes the oft-quoted election law blog, which the ABA Journal named to its Blog 100 Hall of Fame, and his newest book, Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Democracy, and the Threat to American Democracy, appeared earlier this year. We'll be hearing from, and I will be turning things over to Professor Aderson François. Professor François is the Agnes Williams Research Professor at Georgetown Law. He directs our Voting Rights Institute and the Civil Rights section of our Institute for Public Representation. His scholarly interests include voting rights, education law, and the history of slavery and Reconstruction. In 2008, the transition team for President Obama appointed Professor François as lead agency reviewer for the United States Commission on Civil Rights. He's testified before Congress on civil rights issues and drafted numerous briefs to the United States Supreme Court and State Supreme Court, and he received his BA and JD from NYU Law School. So it's an extraordinary group of academic panelists, an extraordinary group of leaders in the voting rights area. So let me turn matters over for further introductions and to our moderating, Professor Aderson François. Aderson?
Thank you very much, Dean, and thank you to the panelists for joining us this morning, and thank you for the audience for also joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce three of our alumni who will be participating in the panel today. And then we're going to get into the discussion. Just a heads up in terms of the format that we're going to follow. rather than to have the panelists make an individual presentation at the start, it's pretty much going to be an open-ended conversation that is organized around the set of questions that you submitted to us. So turning to our three remaining panelists, it is my pleasure to introduce Sylvia Albert, who's an alumnus of Georgetown, class of 2006. Sylvia serves as a director of votings and elections at Common Cause, which is a nonpartisan grassroots organization. She brings more than a decade of professional experience in public interest law and public policy campaigns, including of particular events to our discussion today, expanding ballot access, reducing barriers to participation in voting, and combating voter intimidation among historically disenfranchised communities. In the Obama administration, she served as program analyst and advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunities, where her work including fair housing issues. She holds a BA from University of California, Berkeley, and as I mentioned before, she's a Georgetown class of 2006. Next, we have Marc Morial, who is also an alumnus of Georgetown Law, class of 1983. He is currently the president and CEO of the National Urban League, the nation's largest advocacy and civil rights organization. As many of you know, he served as mayor of New Orleans and was president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. He has been recognized as one of the 100 most influential Black Americans by Ebony Magazine and one of the 100 most influential Black lawyers in America. He is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and Georgetown Law class of 83. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you.
Last, we have Andrea Young, who is the executive director of ACLU of Georgia. Under her leadership, the ACLU of Georgia has grown in influence, impact, and membership. Her specialty and her work, in addition to combating injustice and inequality, focuses on voting rights, women's rights, and reforming the criminal legal system. Prior to joining the ACLU, she taught leadership and social policy at Georgia State University and was the founding executive director of the Andrew Young Foundation. She has worked as a congressional and Senate aide in various capacities, and she's also a founding board member of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And she is a graduate of Georgetown Law, class of 1979. Welcome, Andrea. So to get into our discussion, and I'm going to first pose this question to all our panelists because it was a question that was uppermost in the audience mind, and it's essentially us addressing the elephant in the room. President Trump has long questioned the legitimacy of the American electoral system. As far back as his 2016 campaign, he suggested that he wasn't prepared to accept the result if he'd lost. After he won the Electoral College, he argued quite forcefully that he had actually won the popular vote. If you discounted what he termed to be millions of illegal votes in California, he suggested that he had also won Maine because there were illegal voters who were transported by bus from Massachusetts. After he won, he formed a commission to study voting fraud. Supposedly that was rife with difficulties until it was disbanded. And as the current election season has progressed, he's becoming more and more vocal in suggesting that, in fact, if he were to lose, he would consider the election to be illegitimate. And in many instances, this has gone beyond words. As I'm sure some of our panelists will discuss, his campaign has been engaged in active litigation around the country, among other things, to stop various jurisdictions from counting mailing ballots early. And in some instances this week, it was just reported that his campaign has contacted various local boards, instructing them to ignore directions from their Secretary of States that the campaign found to be objectionable. So my initial question to the panel, again, based on the submissions that we've gotten for the audience, really come to this. Is this just the usual political theater and bluster on the part of our president? Or have we reached a point where we should be seriously concerned that regardless of the outcome, that the November election will be perceived by segments of the population as being fundamentally illegitimate? And if that's so, what can we do about that?
Hi, well, I'll jump in here because the ACLU is having national meetings on this very topic, how to both discuss the issues in this election in a way that does not in itself suppress the vote. You know, there's a concern that if we talk too much about the difficulties, that it can be discouraging to voters. So we want to talk about this in a way that, you know, uh, that talks about the rights that people have, their rights at the polling place, what are alternatives. At the same time, where we're also working behind the scenes, and you know, you think of the ACLU as lawyers and the litigation that we do, but in the affiliates, we're also very involved on the ground with our state legislatures, with our county commissions, you know, with our mayors, working on having a safe, clean, and well-run election. So in Georgia, we've recruited over 2,000 ACLU volunteers to be poll workers, not even in addition to the poll monitoring work that goes on, to work inside the polls to help the apparatus. We started doing that because so many polling places were closed because older people rightfully didn't want to risk the exposure to coronavirus. So we're also talking about what is the messaging that's happening. I think one of the things that people can do is only to share accurate information about things that are going on, not succumb to, you know, the social media madness about all the negativity. We're researching the rules. Many of our states now, because of the NRA, have open carry. So we're concerned with what the president has said about, you know, stand by Proud Boys, that people may show up at polls armed as they have in some of the Black Lives Matter protests. But I think this is, you know, this is also a time when we really do see people are not taking our democracy for granted. You know, we've sort of thought that, you know, democracy was this sort of resilient thing where American exceptionalism. I think more and more people are really engaged and participating in the system. And even within the Trump administration, there was just a video released from the FBI and NSA, Cybersecurity Agency, and National Counterintelligence, talking about safeguarding the vote, that they were fighting to, you know, make sure that there was stability, that people should be prepared, participate, and be patient. Because of the incredible outpouring of mail-in ballots in the time of COVID, we are not likely to know the night of the election. We've got to prepare people for that. We have to remind the media of that. And I think we can, I think we can have a election that people will accept with a strong outcome. And I think that's what we're making sure that everyone who chooses to vote has a fair opportunity to vote. And I think we can have an election that people will accept despite the interference of the current president.
Well, let's stay on that first question, and perhaps I may, ask you, Paul, as someone who has litigated these issues for so long on a nonpartisan basis, and also to you, Rick, as someone who has studied this issue for so long, whether or not we are in a unique moment, whether there is another historical analogy for the top chief executive of the country to so openly question the legitimacy of the system.
Well, I'll jump in then, Aderson. This is Paul. It does seem to me we are in an unusual, probably unique moment where so many people are being convinced by the president that that there's fraudulent voting happening, and it's being tied to voting by mail at a time when many people legitimately want to vote by mail just because of the pandemic. And one thing that's clear is that these claims of voter fraud in mail voting are simply false. There is no basis for them. The experience of states that have been voting entirely by mail for years shows that. And the Trump campaign has been running around the country litigating to try to prevent people from having ballots distributed to them early, litigating to try to prevent ballots from being counted early. Every time they do that, though, the courts are saying you don't have any evidence of a problem here. And but it does leave us in a situation where I think, as you suggested, Aderson, if Mr. Trump loses, it may very well take a while after the election to get there, and there will be further claims of fraud as the vote count changes over time. And I do worry a great deal that we will have a country that is hurt by the fact that a significant percentage of the population simply don't accept the legitimacy of the outcome. It is really a very, very unfortunate situation we've gotten ourselves into. What to do to fix it, I don't know. I mean, a very clear vote would be one, but other than that, I'm not sure I have a solution.
Marc?
Yeah, so first, let me say thank you. I'm so honored to be part of this event and to celebrate this great anniversary of Georgetown. I agree with what Paul said, that it's very unfortunate that we're in a situation where no matter who wins the election, there is going to be a substantial number of people who believe that the election was not conducted fairly. And we can put a lot of that, the blame for that at the feet of President Trump, who has made unprecedented, repeated statements about the fraudulent use of ballots. This is nothing new for him. Even when he won election in 2016, he claimed that there was massive fraud in the election. So that's not new. What I think is new and troubling is that it's coming, as Paul mentioned, in the midst of a pandemic, when we are all struggling to figure out how people can vote safely and fairly. And of course, during a pandemic, we really care who our leaders are. This is a time of crisis, and we should be uniting. And unfortunately, there's a lot of division. We now have over 300 lawsuits that are pending in the courts over rules related to the election and COVID. And there are 2 right now pending on an emergency basis before the Supreme Court. And so this is a problem that goes well beyond Trump. And he may be a piece of it. But when I wrote my book, Election Meltdown, that came out in February, I said, there are a number of factors that have caused Americans to lose faith in the legitimacy of the process. And I know we're going to talk later about kind of long-term solutions, but I think we do have to focus, as Sylvia said, on what can we do between now and early November to ensure that we have a safe and fair election. And one of the most important things here is transparency. Transparency among election officials as to what, how is voting taking place? When we get to vote counting, how many votes are still outstanding, and what is the process? Because there are going to be allegations of stolen elections. There's going to be allegations of rigging. And so the more accurate information we can get from election officials as to what's going on, the better off we're going to be.
Sticking to that still first question, I want to make sure to ask your thoughts, Sylvia and Marc, as to your reaction, your sense, or your read of this moment we're in as 2 people who are on the grounds, where essentially it's fairly unique that the chief executive of the country is so openly suggesting that unless he wins, the election will be illegitimate. I mean, what's your sense of that?
Well,
mute for now. Go ahead.
It's highly unusual. I mean, just like everybody else said, right? This is not what anybody expects in an election. We all knew 2020 was going to be a difficult year. We didn't quite know it was going to be this difficult. I will tell you, on the board of all the possibilities of an election of what would happen in 2020, the president telling people to vote twice was not on my board. It really wasn't. I had all of the possibilities and that was not there. So yeah, this is unusual. And I think, as Rick said, what is so important is giving the public right information. And we do that through transparency and education. And that is something that, we have not had a lot of when it comes to elections. And that is, I think, part of the reason we are where we are. Our electorate isn't as educated about the internal functions of the election. And so when somebody like President Trump comes along and, kind of batters at it, and especially in the kind of the midst of the mis and disinformation world of social media, people are more likely to believe it. So I think we need to be out there with real information. I think, absolutely there's going to be a percentage of the population who does not believe the election is legitimate. That is odd. That is, what we've always, had great pride in the fact that America doesn't have that, right? There are all those other countries that have that, but America doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I think we do need to take a look at, our basic systems and how they're set up. And after this, assuming we all survive, how we educate our electorate and how we protect against this kind of misinformation and undermining of the election in the future.
Marc, thoughts? Marc, you're on mute. Marc,
Okay, I keep the host keeps me muted.
Okay.
Let me first of all say congratulations to Georgetown University Law Center for 150 years. Quite an accomplishment, and I think we're all proud to be a part of the Georgetown University Law Center community. Let me tell you what this reminds me of. 500 years ago, there was a raging debate. Is the world flat or is the world round? This notion of a fraudulent election is an orchestrated, intentional campaign of lies designed to suppress the vote. It fits into a broader strategy that's been consistently undertaken since the election of Barack Obama by forces on the political right to seek to suppress the vote. And this idea that the system is fraudulent, that you can't trust the outcome, is designed to discourage people from voting in the election. That's what it is. It is an orchestrated, designed political strategy. People of goodwill have to call it for what it is. It's a campaign of lies. It's an orchestrated strategy. It accelerated when the Supreme Court issued its decision in Shelby v. Holder, because it opened the floodgates for state after state after state to introduce measures to make it difficult, predominantly for Black and brown people to vote, with a cover narrative of fraud, a cover narrative of fraud with no underlying evidence. It's a cover story. Fraud is the reason. No, the real reason is we want to suppress the participation of young voters, Black voters, and brown voters. We have to see this for what it is. In Donald Trump's case, he began the narrative of, I don't trust the outcome, as what I call an early case of sour grapes. He thought he was going to lose. So when he thought he was going to lose, he said, well, let me just undermine the result, so I'll have an excuse. In this instance, the same narrative is playing out. The fear of losing, combined with the diabolical strategy of lying and misrepresentation. What I will say to you is we sued the Postal Service, as did many others. And we are involved in a number of these, more than 300 lawsuits that were referenced. But we've got to see it for what it is. It is a fundamental attack on American democracy. designed to shatter people's confidence in voting, in participating, where there's not a scintilla of evidence, no cases, legit, variously nothing. And this is what we're going to see. So if Donald Trump is not successful, he's going to be whining, he's going to be crying, he's going to be claiming foul, because he can't accept reality and can't accept the fact. You can expect that that will be the case. And so I think what we all have to do is recognize, I've been saying to my supporters, we will not be intimidated and we will not be psychologically manipulated by all of this talk, all of this rhetoric. We can't do anything but push back through litigation and advocacy against the steps that have been taken legislatively, or the steps that have been taken in Florida to close early polling places, or the failure of the voter registration website in the state of Florida. This is a systemic, orchestrated effort to suppress the vote. And it's designed to camouflage the fact that it's designed to suppress the vote. And I think we need to understand it for what it is. The reason why we're shocked by it is because we've never seen it before, because we've never seen it in modern times, because it strikes for many of us, and I think people who may be listening, is so intellectually dishonest. How could someone do that? Well, we are witnessing this in pursuit of and in the quest of power.
Thank you, Marc. Let's pick up on some of the points that each of you have made to get to more specific topic of voter suppression. And for that, I'd like to first turn to you, Andrea, and try to give us a sense of your experience on the ground in Georgia, be it in recent past elections or in this current election season. What sort of voter suppression issues that you are encountering?
Yeah, I'd like to, co-sign everything that Marc said, and with his, usual eloquence. So my first experience with voting in the state of Georgia was, I was a toddler. My dad was a pastor. He started registering people to vote in the 50s and prompted a Klan rally. So I think we have to put the voter suppression in the context of white supremacy and the persistent, for the 150 years and more efforts to suppress Black votes, particularly, but not exclusively in the South. When I came in as executive director of the ACLU, we had voting rights as a primary agenda. My legal director is a voting rights expert because Georgia has been ground zero for voter suppression. Everything in the voter suppression handbook is in play in Georgia. Georgia's electorate is over 30% African American, not the population, the electorate. And so only through voter suppression do we have an extreme right-wing government and controlling the state house and the governor's mansion and all statewide elected officials. So we started working initially on the process, again, that fraud is used as an excuse for purging people from the rolls. And so one of our first cases was 200,000 people have been purged from the rolls in Georgia, duly registered voters, citizens of the state of Georgia. For technicalities, 30,000 of those people in total violation of the Voting Rights Act and Voter Registration Act. So we were able to get them restored. We have had to fight poll closures. Since Shelby, over 200 polling locations have been closed in the state of Georgia. 500,000 people have been purged from the rolls. We've had to fight counties that had districts for electing school board members, and so reverted back to at-large districts to dilute minority votes. Gerrymandering was designed to not only dilute the impact of the Black vote, but also to get influence in more liberal areas, to get influence of, so they would draw something that would include, where one district would include, an extreme rural area and an urban area, to try to dilute the policy impact of that urban area. We've had to work nationally. ACLU had to fight on the census because the census question on citizenship was designed to reduce participation of particularly Latinx Americans in participating in the census. So we have had to fight virtually on every single front around voter suppression. One year, I think we kept polls open that affected 17,000 voters. And so this is pervasive. And the difference that it makes to not to have Shelby or not, with pre-clearance, many of these things would have been dealt with as an administrative matter. Now we have one lawsuit that's been going on for 4 years, and will probably not be, those will probably, even though we're winning at each level, there'll be new districts drawn before this litigation will finally be resolved. So it takes tremendous resources to fight voter suppression in a state like Georgia and across the country.
Thank you, Andrea. Sylvia, I want to pick up on Andrea's point that voter suppression is nothing new, particularly against Black and brown people and poor people. But I wonder if, in your experience at Common Cause, to what extent, if at all, COVID has changed the landscape or the manner in which this sort of voter suppression is taking place?
Right, Andrea is absolutely right. Our system is designed to suppress the votes of Black and brown voters. When people say the system is broken, you can respond with, no, the system is working exactly the way that it was designed to be. What is happening now is, due to COVID, all of these policies that were in place to suppress the vote of Black and brown voters are now also affecting white voters, right? So when you have over 15 states where an excuse is required to vote, that was more likely to affect low-income voters, Black and brown voters, others who didn't have the freedom to be able to go to the ballot to go to the polling place on election day. Well, now, you know what? That's a lot more people because of a global pandemic, and that encompasses more white voters. When you're talking about voter ID laws, hey, look, all of the DMVs or BMVs are closed due to COVID. So all these people can't get an ID. Oh no. Well, that always affected Black and brown and low income voters and voters with disabilities, voters who speak other languages, right? But now all of the sudden, it is now, becoming an issue, and people seem to care more about it because it's affecting white voters, right? So my hope is that this has at least partly opened people's eyes to the realities, and that, when really, I think I often compare it to, like the drug war, right? When opioids were, you're a drug addict when you're on opioids until suburban white individuals started using Oxy. And then now it's a disease that we need to really deal with. That might not be the best analogy, but I really do feel like it's very similar. So I'm hopeful that this attention will actually lead to further progress, because you know what, the white voters out there will say, well, why did this law exist when it affected me now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, Sylvia. And I think that leads us to the question that I wanted to raise with Paul, because another form of disenfranchisement that has gotten into the news lately that most folks were not really talking about a few years back is felon disenfranchisement and the experience of Florida in disenfranchising voters unless they pay their full fines and fees. And as much as Florida is in the news, this practice is not unique to Florida. And I know that you've been involved in litigation in Florida, including the recent decision by the 11th Circuit that you argued, where they wrongly, in my view, reversed the district court. So I was hoping to sort of pick your brain about this issue of the disenfranchisement of folks with former convictions, and ask you, to what extent should we really think about this as a larger problem, or is it really a fairly narrow problem?
Well, the disenfranchisement of people who have committed crimes goes all the way back in this country, but it has a rather unfortunate history. It became one of the main tools in the toolbox of the institution of Jim Crow at the beginning of the 20th century, along with poll taxes and literacy tests. They designed which crimes would be disenfranchising to help in disenfranchising African Americans. And as the 20th century went on, these things started to be made less bad in some states, but Florida maintained a really, really strict system of essentially permanent disenfranchisement of anybody who had a felony conviction. The things you could try to do to get out from under it were so rarely successful. It was essentially permanent. And they got to the point where they had almost half of the people disenfranchised in the whole country were in Florida.
Wow.
1.5 million people. So what happens then in 2018, and one of the great remarkable things is that the people of Florida rose up and voted well over 60% for Amendment 4 to say, we're not going to be that state anymore. And this was a coalition of left, right, and center people, evangelical Christians who said we need to have forgiveness for people. People need to be able to get back and be part of our state and part of our country in a full way. And then what happens is really monumentally disappointing is that the amendment gets interpreted and implemented in a manner that nullified it for well over half of the relevant people. 750,000 people at least cannot vote and probably will never be able to vote in Florida because they owe money. They owe fines, they owe restitution, and most importantly, they owe fees. When you get prosecuted in Florida, you get taxed to pay the costs of the court system. They have a rule that the court system has to be self-supporting, so they have to get the money from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so you come out of jail, you have a felony conviction, you have poor education, your chances of earning enough money to support yourself and pay off several $1,000s worth of fines and fees very low. And so we brought a case, Campaign Legal Center did, along with the ACLU and others, and had a really wonderful decision from the trial court that said, this is unconstitutional. It's a poll tax. It is also a burden on people's voting rights based on wealth, and we don't do that in this country. But it was unfortunately reversed 6-4 in the en banc 11th Circuit, in a really, I think, unfortunate decision, because it basically says, well, we didn't have to give you back your rights at all. We can give it back to you on these terms that say poor people are going to continue to be deprived of voting rights. Yeah. More affluent people won't. Even if you did the same crime and had the same sentence. So you know, this is a Florida problem. It is gradually being solved in most other states, not all. Alabama has a terrible problem with this, but it is primarily a Florida problem, and I think it's really to overrule the will of the people in that way and leave so many hundreds of thousands of people unable to vote is really just terrible.
Yeah. I want to offer a comment on that, because I think a fine point on this is that the voters of Florida enacted this amendment to their own constitution. And then after that, the state legislature came back to undercut it. Now, had the proposers of the amendment envisioned that the legislature would seek to pretty much overrule the will of the voters, I'm certain the amendment may have been written differently, right? It may have been written in a different way. And the tragedy is, and you made a great point, what happens in the criminal justice system all too often is that people enter into plea agreements. Invariably, when they enter into these plea agreements, They are assessed court costs, sometimes fines, sometimes restitution, sometimes in lieu of a longer jail sentence. So this is a pattern and a practice to impose these financial requirements on people. And I thought the trial court's decision, you see, this is troubling that we in effect have a strand in the judicial system that seeks to take the amendment which was passed in record time and ratified by the states in the 1960s, overruling the poll tax, and it effectively nullified by judicial fiat. So this battle is going to continue. We have got in a new Congress, with a new government, if we get a new government, we've got to make job one passing a piece of legislation to protect the vote, a new Voting Rights Act, a new anti-suppression law, a new set of laws that basically shuts down all these shenanigans that have been tried and that are being undertaken all over the country. It's just a power grab.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I want to also play a little bit on that, if I could, that it is a bigger problem than Florida, because in states like Georgia, what happens is that it's vague. And so there isn't an absolute prohibition, but because it's accompanied with, if you register and the state later decides you weren't entitled, that is itself a felony. And so people are in this catch-22 situation, and many people who have an arrest 10, 20 years in a conviction, 10, 20 years, they will not even try to register because they don't want any trouble. And it creates a tremendous drag on on voter participation, that so many people, they are afraid, and we can't give them clear instructions because in Georgia, the law itself was vague. So we were very disappointed about what happened in Florida. We were making progress with our legislature to begin to change some of these things, and also administratively let people know when they are entitled to register. But they have no pressure to do that now. So it's very, very damaging what the court has done. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the point that you made, Marc. I want to bring in Rick to ask him about one particular form of disenfranchisement that we haven't talked about so far, because all the other forms of disenfranchisement that we've discussed, including voter purging, felon disenfranchisement, poll tax, etc., have a fairly long history. But it seems, Rick, that we've entered a new age, a new kind of voter suppression that is really about voter disinformation and targeting voters using big media and big tech. And you literally, quite literally wrote a book on this issue. And I guess my question, as somebody who's not deeply involved in big tech, is it simply normal politics, or are we really now facing a unique threat when you consider the amount and the torrent of misinformation that targets people online?
Yeah, so if we go back and look at 2016, and we think about the different efforts that the Russian government made to try to influence our elections, we saw three strands. One was stealing emails from the Democratic officials and leaking those. One was the probing of state voter registration databases, I think, to undermine people's confidence. But the last one, and the one that goes most to your question, was social media activity. Some of it was disinformation, right? Some of it was false information, but a lot of it wasn't necessarily false information as much as it was trying to impersonate other people and spread messages to suppress the vote. And according to reports that were issued through the Senate Intelligence Committee, these efforts were targeted more at African-American voters than anyone else. So there was a site set up called Blacktivist by Russians purporting to be African-Americans who were upset that Hillary Clinton was not doing enough for the African-American community. And the message was, only Democratic lives matter to Hillary Clinton. It was really kind of incendiary stuff. What gets really difficult here is figuring out what to do about it. So the way that the social media companies are handling it now is that they go more after the fact that people are impersonating others. They call it coordinated inauthentic behavior. Then they do go after the messages themselves. There have always been attempts to try to discourage people from voting, suppress turnout. But I think when you're talking about it happening on social media, it's different because of the virality, the way in which information spreads. And of course, now when there's misinformation about voting, we don't need the Russians to be hacking us. We're hacking ourselves. That is, we can spread lots of misinformation without foreign individuals and lots of suppressive kind of talk. Now, the Supreme Court's response to all of this has always been that counter speech is the right solution. But it's really hard to counter misinformation and suppressive speech when it becomes viral and when, for example, it's coming from the president. It takes, the president puts out a tweet about, don't vote by mail, and because it's fraudulent, and it takes Twitter or Facebook days to decide whether or not they put a label on it. And then the label they put on it doesn't necessarily even suggest that it contains false information. Mm-hmm. So I think we're seeing something different than we've seen before because of the speed and reach of the kind of information. The dirty tricks are not new, but being able to spread them through these technological means is new, and it raises really difficult questions. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're private companies, and I wouldn't feel very comfortable to have a government law that would say you have to remove misleading speech. I mean, imagine if we had that now, and the Trump administration was the one in charge of deciding what's misleading speech. Yeah. So it presents a real conundrum, and I think part of I'm still working through this on a new book project. Part of the solution, I think, is going to have to be that consumers are going to demand that there are that there's reining in of this kind of speech by these companies, or these companies should not get the support. We should not give our data over to companies that are not going to take a stronger line on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I know that. Thank you, Rick. I know that this issue of this new form of voter disinformation is something that we could spend all day talking about. But I want to switch gear for just a moment, because in preparing for this panel, the overwhelming number of questions that we received from alumni and from the audience is about the Electoral College. And I suspect all of you from different perspectives probably have a point of view on that issue. And most folks simply, in the way that they phrase the question is, why don't we just abolish the Electoral College? Why don't we simply switch to a system of national vote, one person, one vote? Whoever gets the most votes gets elected. So it's not so much a question as a statement. And I'm curious to know, and I'll go first to you, Marc. What's your perspective?
I think the Electoral College, and I'll tell you, this is just interesting. I had to debate this from sixth grade, and my position has never changed. I think it's anachronistic. I think it's from the horse and buggy era. And I think the Electoral College was a political compromise made at the Constitutional Convention to, like the 3/5 rule, to advantage, if you will, the slave states that had fewer white residents than the northern states at the time. I think it's only recently become a bigger issue because we've had two of the last three presidents, George Bush and Donald Trump, elected as president by simply winning 270 votes plus in the Electoral College, but losing the popular vote. Before that, there had been few instances in American history where the winner of the popular vote didn't also win the Electoral College. But imagine this, American democracy, the citadel of citizen participation, has a system to elect its president where the winner does not depend on who gets the most votes. It gets on who can put together the best algebraic formula of states to get to 270 electoral votes. Let me give you a perspective on why the Electoral College is so, if you will, anachronistic. It has created a system where candidates spend 80% of their time campaigning only in a handful of states, because winning those states is crucial to an Electoral College formula. So what it has turned into, if you look at the so-called battlegrounds, the Wisconsins, the Michigans, the Pennsylvanias, the Virginias, the North Carolinas, the Floridas, for example, Georgia now becoming a battleground. Historically, in the battlegrounds, you're going to see much higher voter turnout, much higher campaign expenditures, more television commercials, more organizing efforts, more focus on those states, and all the other states and communities kind of are second fiddle, left behind. So the consequence of the Electoral College is it also warps democracy, in addition to just being anachronistic. Now, why can't we change it? It requires a constitutional amendment, or it requires some agreements by the states to cast their electoral ballots, their Electoral College ballots in a particular way, proportionalized to the number of popular vote, the distribution of the popular vote in their state. A constitutional amendment is going to be not impossible, but difficult. Why? Because the Electoral College gives the smaller states more weight and more advantage. You take the large number of states in the United States who have less than 2 to 3 million people, who are smaller than most major metropolitan areas, and they have a greater degree. So you take Alaska, which has less than 1 million people. They have 3 votes in the Electoral College. And you could go on to all of these states. So they have an advantage. So what people are going to argue is that the large states are going to, quote, dominate the small states. The fault with that is that the election for president is about states. I say it's about voters. It's about people. It's about one person, one vote. That concept did not exist when the Constitution was written. It is now enshrined in how we think about American democracy. So this is an anachronistic system that needs to be gotten rid of. Whether we can do it or not is a tougher question.
Let me jump in and ask the perspective of the other panelists by playing devil's advocate. Let's put aside for now the question of whether or not it can be changed, be there by constitutional amendment or through a national compact. Would abolishing the Electoral College really solve the problem that Marc is talking about? Because wouldn't candidates simply campaign in the larger states to basically maximize their numbers? California, Texas, New York, and Florida. In other words, would it change anything if the focus is that we don't want so much focus on battleground states? Would it simply switch the battleground states around rather than basically make sure that everybody is paid attention to?
Well, if every vote counts the same, then the candidates will go wherever they can gather a crowd of people. It doesn't matter the size of the state. It matters where there's people that they can organize and get to vote for them. And so it'll be much less isolated in terms of where the campaigns go if you have that kind of a system. And one of the things it'll do is it'll increase turnout, because one of the real problems with turnout in this country is if you live in a really red or really blue state, even if you care a lot about who the president is, you know your vote's not going to make any difference. And so, but if we're talking about a fairly close election nationally, then every vote counts. And so I think it would have a lot of beneficial effects on how the campaigns are run and how people respond to the campaigns.
Well, Rick or Sylvia, are you willing to defend the Electoral College?
Now you need a little more diversity on the panel, I think, on that question. My big problem with the Electoral College, this maybe takes us a little bit off the topic, is, you know, it's one thing to talk about the popular vote versus the Electoral College, but the particular rules we have for implementing the Electoral College are just terrible. I had a piece in CNN Opinion the other night that people can look up on how we don't have we could have a national crisis if either Trump or Biden became incapacitated or died because of COVID or something else. We don't have the rules in place to replace those candidates. We could end up with a huge fight in Congress. We could end up with the Supreme Court again choosing a president, because it's like a Rube Goldberg machine. We don't have a simple method of translating the people's preferences into votes. I do think, and this is maybe going to your point about what would it mean if we went for the popular vote. I think you'd see California, for example, start enfranchising 16-year-olds, because to run up the numbers. There's all kinds of things that could be done too. What about enfranchising non-citizens? Now, these may be good things to do, but it would be the wrong reason to do it to try to, I think, get more influence over the presidential election. So there would be maybe a race to the bottom there if that happened.
Well, let me turn to Sylvia and Andrea, because if you accept Whit's argument, if you accept Paul's argument, that after all, this shouldn't be about states, it should be about people, wouldn't that still leave us in a situation where, if Rick is right, if I want to one up the numbers, I really don't have any reason to pay that much of attention to small states and rural areas, do I? And isn't that a problem?
So I'm a person who believes in cities. I think states are not are artificial constructs. They were, they are a legacy of our history, but that the real identity that people have, so my book is about Atlanta. So, the real identity that people have, the thing that really moves our country, the places where our culture happens, is in the metropolitan areas. And what the Electoral College does is make Atlanta votes have been irrelevant in the context of Georgia, the Houston and Dallas and Austin, in Texas. So in the predominantly red states, the cities, which are the engines of opportunity, which are the engines of commerce, which are the engines of cultural, evolution, are squashed. So I live in a county that has a larger population than many of the states that have 2 senators and Electoral College influence and all. So no, I am so frustrated with the Electoral College. I'm like Marc, since the 6th grade, this is a relic of slavery, and it has no place in the modern era.
So Sylvia, it falls to you to defend it.
I was going to make one other point on the Electoral College. And I think, so we have no other election contest that I've been able to identify in the United States where the person who gets the most votes doesn't necessarily win. This is aberrational in its setup. And we have to put ourselves, it's hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of the founding fathers in Philadelphia who made political deals to try to construct a new nation. And some of the deals they made, like the Electoral College, may have made sense for a period when senators were not directly elected, when only white men who owned property voted, when democracy in its purest forms was so new that people sort of distrusted it. And that it is one of those things that is anachronistic and should be gotten rid of. And I think that we're going to continue to have this debate. It strikes young people as being odd. And because it strikes them as being odd, it plays into the narrative that, quote unquote, the system is rigged. That means you can rig an election by just winning certain states and not winning the overall vote. And so we got to understand that it undermines confidence in the elegant but simple concept. One person, one vote, and the majority wins.
Thank you, Marc. Sylvia, I feel that you probably are not going to defend the Electoral College, but I wanted to make sure to give you a moment if you wanted to say something.
I actually just want to say, I just kind of want to point out that we don't have one person, one vote. Even if you take out the Electoral College, we don't have one person, one vote. I live in Washington, D.C. I do not have a voting representative in Congress. I grew up in California. One representative of one House representative in California represents something like 700,000 individuals. One in Wyoming represents 250,000. So at no point do we actually have one person, one vote. Our system was designed this way, as Marc pointed out, for white land-owning men. So yeah, no, I can't defend the Electoral College, sorry.
No, Sylvia, let me know. Okay, well, then here's another topic that the audience is deeply concerned about. And I know that this is something that Rick has written a lot about. And I know that those of you who are on the ground dealing with it have a great deal of difficulty dealing with it. I know that Paul and his campaign legal center team who went around the country litigating in hundreds of jurisdictions have to face that problem. That in fact, there is no one electoral system in this country. I mean, there, not just one for every state, but within the state, there are ones for sometimes every county. And I think the question we got from the audience is why? Why can't we simply move to a system, particularly when you're talking about national elections for president and Congress, where we have a uniform set of rules set up by the federal government that would sort of get rid of all these sort of difficulties and suppression and mess, et cetera, That is, how is it that we term ourselves the longest continuing democracy, we have a system that seems to be held by scotch tape and glue? Why can't we simply federalize it?
I did an event a few weeks ago with eminent election law scholars from Canada and Australia. And they kind of marvel. It's kind of like they look at the United States the way you rubberneck when you go past an accident on the freeway. If you look at almost every other advanced democracy around the world, particularly the Commonwealth countries, but not only them, what you see is national nonpartisan election administration run by professionals whose allegiance is to the integrity of the system rather than to a political party. We have not only a system that is run by partisans. I think 33 or 34 chief election officers in the states are elected in partisan elections, and many others are partisan appointed officials. We also have hyper decentralization and fragmentation of authority. So we have something like 10,500 different electoral jurisdictions. I think in Michigan alone, they've got something like 1,600 different bodies administering the election. I mean, so it's worse than Scotch tape. And speaking of Scotch tape, in New York, if you voted by mail and sealed your ballot with a piece of Scotch tape, you were disenfranchised. I mean, it is the craziest kind of system for running an election. I had a piece in the New York Times a few months ago called Bring on the 28th Amendment, where I said that we need to actually have a right to vote in the United States Constitution. And as part of that right to vote, in order to protect it, we need to set up national nonpartisan election administration. Now, how could we do it? What I say is we should have someone appointed by the president, confirmed by a 3/4 vote of the House of Representatives. I mean, so a real consensus candidate. Give that person or a board a 10-year term and an independent budget. Require states to have uniform rules, or at least uniform standards for voting technology, like what's going on in Georgia now, where they're changing the code that's being put on the voting machines because if they left off 20 races, or out here where I live in Los Angeles County, they forgot to send 2,100 people ballots that listed the name of the president. I just heard from a reporter in Ohio, 250,000 people got the wrong, up to 250,000 people got the wrong congressional districts on their mail-in ballots. We need competence, we need uniformity, we need a national system. I think it's going to take another crisis like a Bush versus Gore to get movement on this, but I think it's going to be a generational move. And I would couple it with a national guarantee of a right to vote. So it's not the Constitution only protecting the right to vote as a negative right. You can't discriminate on the basis of race. You can't discriminate on the basis of gender. a positive right to vote. We don't even have a right to vote for president. We didn't get into this now, but there's talk now. There was an article in the Atlantic that got a lot of people worried. What if state legislatures try to take back their power to appoint presidential electors directly? So it's even worse than Marc said when he described, the Electoral College as violating the one person, one vote principle. It violates the vote principle because it's not even required that we give people the vote. It's just by legislative grace that we have it.
That seems to go to the point that you were making earlier, Sylvia.
Well made.
That there's actually not one person, one vote. And I know that Common Cause obviously is a nonpartisan organization, but from your perspective, do you folks take a position on that as to whether or not perhaps we should move toward federalizing the system?
I actually don't know that if we have a national policy position on that. I think what we have, as Rick pointed out, is an exceptionally decentralized system. But the idea behind, the Voting Rights Act and other provisions was that there's a floor that any state can't go below. The problem is we have not moved the floor in 50 years. The floor is way down. It's way, way down here, right? So even in the midst of the system that we have now, we can make improvements. Now, obviously, I'm with Rick. Let's burn it down and start over. No, but it's a lot harder to fix something than to start from scratch and make it good. But if we, again, talking about the realities of the current world, we can improve the system we have, but as Rick pointed out, we are run by partisans, and partisans don't want to improve the systems because partisans want power, and they have power because the system as it works right now gave them the power. So why would they ever want to adjust the system? So that's why we've pushed things like, ending gerrymandering and redistricting in various places, and eliminating, barriers to the ballot to try to get the power away from the partisans. But again, the system was made this way to give it was made by partisans for partisans to hold on to power. So it is not an easy fix.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to play devil's advocate. I want to get Paul's perspective and as well as Andrea's. And maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but I have heard in the past Rick defend the decentralized system on the basis that it makes it very, very difficult, if not impossible, for a bad outside actor to hack it, right? Because you can't hack the system when in fact there is no one system, there's a billion system. So Paul, isn't that a virtue of the fact, isn't decentralization a virtue in that sense, right?
The only virtue you can come up with is that it's hard to hack 50 different or maybe 10,000 different election systems in a time of technological threats of that sort. But let me say, even if we think that we can't get to the Rick's solution of an amendment to create a national election system, there is a lot that can be done, and the Congress has a great deal of power if it wants to exercise it to improve the election system in all the 50 states, or to raise the floor, as Sylvia put it, much higher than it is now. And many of those provisions are already in a bill. It's called H.R. 1, that's pending in the Congress, that was passed by the House, and could very well be something that the Democrats go ahead and try to pass. It fixes voter registration. It fixes all kinds of different features, gerrymandering, campaign finance, public financing, lots and lots of things to make the system work much, much better and in a much more standardized fashion than it does now. It won't be a panacea, but we certainly could have a better system if Congress would simply focus on making our democracy work better. And I'm hopeful that that will be something we can see in the next few years.
Okay. I want to raise one last point and then perhaps ask the tech folks their help in seeing if we have any live questions from the audience and our alumni. And the last question that I want to raise is actually from the pre-submitted question for the alumni. And that question has to do with the fact that the US has a shockingly low rate of voter participation among Western democracies. It's been consistently shockingly low. And one of the questions we got from the alumni was whether or not the panelists have any view as to how that can be rectified. We can go a full round among all the panelists, but perhaps Andrea, you can take up that question if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think for all the reasons that we've heard, you know, we're kind of in this. We end up in this catch-22. Is that, you know, there's low participation when, you know, groups like the ACLU, Urban League, NAACP, through heroic efforts, you know, get the vote up and get the vote out. Then, you know, in my state, what they do is they say, see, we're not doing voter suppression because look how many people voted.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a system that is designed to restrict access, particularly from, you know, poor people, people who punch a time clock, people who are mobile. You know, we don't have an inclusive system. If we wanted people to vote, we would be 24 hours like Walmart. You know, if people want you, they know what to do. If you move, they would just chase you down and send you your updated information. You would have same day registration. You could just show up with your documents and register at the polls.
Okay.
You would mail in like where just once you register, you get your ballot in the mail, you sit at the kitchen table and fill it out. So our system is not designed to encourage participation. It's designed to reduce participation, especially by people who are not, you know, well-to-do, you know, affluent white folks that speak English. So we can change that. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is a great first step. And I think we really have to look very hard at, you know, Jimmy Carter would say he could never certify a US election as a free and fair by his standards. So we're
starting to get questions from the audience. So I'm going to try to take them up as many as we can in the short time that we have left. So all I would do is that I would ask one panelist per question to take up an answer. The first question is rather technical, and it's as follows. If a local election official refuses to send a voter an absentee ballot, what recourse does that voter have? I said it's quite a specific question. I'm not entirely sure if it can be answered for every jurisdiction. Am I correct? Yes, Sylvia.
So I would say the first thing all voters should do is put the phone number 866-OUR-VOTE in their phone. That is a nonpartisan nationwide hotline that is over 100, is a coalition of over 100 nonpartisan groups nationwide that run this hotline. Lawyers are staffing the hotline and are in contact with the advocates and organizers on the ground. So when you call the hotline and say this is happening, that lawyer can get to somebody who is you know, in Fulton County, Georgia, who has the line to the Fulton County, Georgia Board of Elections and say, hey, this is happening, right? So we do the best we can. Obviously, like that's going to take longer than 3 minutes, but we have, with all of the groups that are on this call and others, cobbled together a system to respond to these specific issues. So 866-OUR-VOTE.
The next question we have actually goes back to another discussion about the national compact. And one participant says that while some of us have argued that a national compact would disadvantage small states, the questioner's own state, Delaware, is actually working to sign onto the compact. So the question is, is any panelist able to comment or where the movement on that compact stand right now? Yes, Rick.
So I mean, you know, why would Delaware be signing it if it's a small state and everyone's going to be campaigning in California and Texas? I think the answer is that this, like everything else in our country, has become a partisan issue. You know, when you've had a number of elections where the popular vote winner has gone to the Democrats and the Electoral College winner has gone to the Republicans, it's now only blue states that have signed on to the compact. And it's unfortunate that Electoral College reform has become like that. But I think that's what would explain why you'd see smaller Democratic states signing on.
If I may follow up, Rick, because I believe the question is from Rachel Torvisha.
I got something.
And the question was, do any of the panelists know where that compact stands? In other words, how much progress has they made on it?
Oh, yeah. I think Paul maybe follows this more closely than I do.
Yeah, it's actually not that far from getting past the 50% mark, where if states that control more than 50% of the electoral votes are willing to say, we'll cast our vote for the popular vote winner, it could work. The problem is the one that Rick mentioned, it's become politicized. And so because the Electoral College has advantaged the Republicans twice in the last 4 elections, red states are not interested in joining up on this compact now. And so whether it can get quite over the top or not is unclear. It may get stalled out just short of 50% of the electoral votes.
I think we may have time for a couple of more questions. The next one comes from Michael Karam. And what he's asking is the payment of fine and fees of court costs limited to southern states, or is it a nationwide problem?
Certainly there are criminal fines in all states.
I think he was
problem arises with it being attached to the right to vote. And that's a situation where the law varies from state to state. And there are other states besides Florida, but the only ones I'm aware of are southern states where you're prevented from voting because you can't pay fines and fees.
Okay. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question, but I do not see a question now in the queue. It's now 12:23. I think we'd promised the audience that we'd end on time. The last question that we're getting is that, could you please address the new voting rights legislation in Congress? How will this right the wrongs of Shelby? And even if it passes, isn't it likely that a conservative Supreme Court will strike it down? And that question is from Mr. Joe Weinstein. That
let me try to take a little bit of that. So one of the fundamental reasons, which was a specious reason, that the Supreme Court struck down the preclearance provision is they said, well, there's no more voting discrimination. Since Shelby, there have been any number of courts that have made specific findings of voting discrimination across the board. The key in a new Voting Rights Act is going to be to build the right legislative record that documents. Now, one panelist shared with us that there have been 300 lawsuits. 300 lawsuits. That's an astounding number of lawsuits that have been filed to challenge voting procedures, many of them based on race. So a new Voting Rights Act is going to have to, is going to require the reinstatement of the preclearance provision in a way that meets the constitutional test that the Supreme Court has laid out. It's going to require evidentiary documentation. But I also like the idea that several panelists have shared this afternoon, that we need some standards that each state has to comply with when it comes to federal elections. So there's going to have to be a lot of work. I would say to you that what has happened since Shelby v. Holder is worse than we predicted. It's worse than we predicted. And we've not been through a single round of reapportionment since Shelby, which could lead to horrific consequences if there are no voting rights protections, no protections against vote dilution, no protections against racial gerrymandering. So it's clear that a new law can fix the problem, but I think the contours of a new law, given what we know today, are going to have to be shaped to deal with today's problems. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a powerful instrument. Its Section 5 provisions were highly effective. It may be that we have to even go further than that in a new Voting Rights Act to address the problems we've all discussed on this panel today.
Thank you, Marc. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to definitely make time to turn things over to Paul, who I know is stepping in the shoes of the dean, to thank the panelists. There's one last question from the audience that I can't help but bring up because I think folks might find it very interesting. And that question comes from Leslie Bellas. And the question is as follows. What will happen if some states are unable to certify the election results by December 14th? Will the Senate responsible for certifying the Electoral College votes, or the House, who selects the winner, in the event neither candidate wins the Electoral College, select the winner? So what happens if by December 14th, we don't have full certification of the votes from the states?
Congress doesn't accept the Electoral College votes until January 6th. December 14th is a date that's described as a safe harbor date. It's a date by which Congress, through a statute, has pledged to accept Electoral College votes. So things could go longer. And in fact, Marco Rubio has proposed a bill that I've endorsed and many others have endorsed that would extend some of these deadlines, because if there is a close election and we have to go to a recount, it could take a bit longer than under these deadlines. There are a lot of convoluted things that can happen if there are multiple slates of electors, or if a state misses the Electoral College deadline. And the question's not exactly right. It's not that it's the Senate versus the House. Both chambers have to agree on the counting of Electoral College votes and find a majority. If not, then we go to tie-breaking rules in the House, and then it could get very messy. Let's just hope we don't get there.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank the panelists for a very similar discussion. I know that we could keep going on for 2 hours, but thank you very much. I had so many more questions on the list that I couldn't get to, but I could listen to you folks talk all day. In the meantime, I want to turn things over to you, Paul, who I know wish to give some greetings on behalf of the dean, who couldn't be here for the end.
Let me say thanks as well to all the panelists, including our distinguished alumni, as well as all the alumni who tuned into this really interesting discussion. It's been a real pleasure to be involved in it, and I'm glad we were able to have this as part of the 150th anniversary ceremonies. Congratulations to the law school as well. And on behalf of the panelists, indeed all of the people who participated in this, let me say thanks as well to you, Aderson, for taking on all the duties of moderating this rather unruly group of panelists. We really appreciate it. So thanks to everyone. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you.